Welcome to part 2. In this episode, I'll be sharing more experiences, but of course, things never turn out the way I think they're going to. So, let's get into it. I never knew him. My mother raised me by herself, and I believe she did an extraordinary job. My mother is my universe, and I love her dearly. But a mother is not a father, and I missed that growing up. I remember once when I was young, maybe 7, 8 years old, I was waiting for the bus to take me to school. I lived, of course, on the south side of Chicago, and my mother would take the bus with me. I had 2 buses, actually, I had to take. Now, anyone in a big city knows that many times 2, maybe even 3 buses will come at the same time going in the same direction, mostly because I think it's usually packed in the morning. This is rush hour. So the first bus that came was packed, but my mother was able to fit on, and she told me to go ahead and ride the second bus, so I did. Turns out that on the first bus, my father was there, and of course, she talked with my father about me, told him how I was doing, that sort of thing. Of course, I got on the second bus, and at the time, I had no idea. This was the closest I ever came to actually meeting my father. Some years later, when I was a young adult, I found out that my father passed away. I suppose when I heard about it, I simply thought, wow, I'm never going to actually meet him. But of course, after the meeting with my grandmother and the way that that went, that was a positive experience. It was different, but it was positive. I thought, well, why not try and go out there to meet my father? Why not? So I planned to do it. I planned to leave my body and see if I could find my father. That night, I remember it was the usual thing. I emerged from my body, and I knew that I was going to have to use the power of thought to travel to where he was. Of course, those of you who have watched, I believe, the first episode, Moving with the Power of Thought, you understand what this is. But interestingly enough, I didn't get into the fact that this mode of movement in the astral plane for me, the moving with the power of thought, is my favorite. I think it has to do with the rush that you get. It is extraordinary. You think something, you hold it in your mind, and suddenly you're rushing toward it. And I cannot describe the speeds that you move at. It didn't take long for me to arrive in my destination. Now, this all really depends. There have been times when I've moved with the power of thought, and it's taken me quite some time to get to where I want to get to, and I'm sitting and I'm wondering, how long is this going to take? However, with this particular trip that I made, it was fairly quick. It didn't last that long. I remember I was in a house. Now, I don't remember many things about this house, but what stood out was a staircase. The staircase was long, it went up high, and it was sky blue. And when I say sky blue, I mean it looked as if someone had taken the sky itself and forged it into steps. That's how it looked. 100% serious. That is how it looked. I started up this sky staircase, and as I walked, I wouldn't say I was yelling, but I was saying, Dad. I was calling out and saying, Dad, are you here? Dad, Dad, are you here? And I kept saying this as I moved up. When I arrived at the top, there were a few rooms. Now, I don't remember specifically how many rooms there were, but there were at least 2, maybe 3. And all of the rooms were empty. I looked around and I called out to my dad again. This time when I called out to him, I said, Dad, I need you. And I said it a few times. At one point, I began to get angry. And I think I started to get angry because I realized that he wasn't here. And even if he was, maybe he just didn't want to meet me. I wasn't sure at the time. In that moment, that's what I felt. Now, this doesn't mean that this is what was actually happening, that this is what he was actually feeling. I realize that. I know that. But in my mind at the time, I felt like maybe he just didn't want to meet up with me. So I left. Now, interestingly enough, and I know this is probably going to sound quite strange to some of you, I took off, right? As I just said, I took off, I left. And as I was flying, I realized I was flying over a forest of some kind. Now, one of my subscribers asked me if I'd ever seen animals in the astral plane. And so interesting because I don't think he realizes that this is when I actually saw the animals that I saw. And I didn't think I would see it. Perhaps it was my guide's way, or those around me, my guardian angels, their way of, I guess, trying to lighten things up a bit, because I think they knew how disappointed I was. So as I was flying, I saw these dogs and they were running on the ground. They were dogs. There was a pack of them, a group of them, and they seemed quite happy and they knew I was flying above them. And I would say every few moments or so, one of the dogs would light up like a ball of light, and they would fly up and they would soar with me for a while, playfully, kind of zigzagging, and then they would go right back down to the ground, and then another dog would do the same thing. And this kept happening until I arrived back into my body. But for those of you who have ever wondered if dogs actually do go to heaven or dogs move on or whatever, I saw what I saw. And I do believe that that was, I suppose, a sort of doggy heaven. Let me tell you a little bit about my cousin. Honestly, I didn't know him as well as I wish I could have. He was an extraordinary being. And the reason I say this is because he lived with a chronic health condition. Now, in my mind, it's not important what that condition was. I will just say this. I will say it was something that he had to deal with daily. And it was something that would have restricted him from having a normal 9-to-5 kind of job. So what did he do? He actually created his own business. He was an entrepreneur and he made it work. You know, there are some people that can live to be 99 years old and truly they've never lived a life. But my cousin, perhaps he lived a small part of that, a fraction of that, and yet he truly lived. He had a life. And for that, I can only look at him with respect and pride. When he passed, of course, he was young. And when I found out, my immediate thought was I wanted to go check on him. I wanted to make sure that everything was okay. And I guess I was thinking I wanted to say goodbye as well because I didn't have that opportunity. So I decided to do it. I decided to make a journey out of my body to meet up with my cousin. I have to tell you that the first attempt was a disaster. And I struggled with whether I wanted to talk about this because for those of you that are new to astral projection or wanting to leave your body for the first time, the last thing that I want to do is frighten you in any way. I do not want to scare you. You have absolutely nothing to be afraid of. But there are certain things that you should know before you leave your body. And one of those things is something you've probably heard from many other people that have left their body. I've seen this on the internet from others that have astral projected that have said this, and I'm going to emphasize this. I'm going to give this a lot of emphasis. Please, please be aware of what you are thinking and how you are feeling before you leave your body. That means if you are feeling angry or vengeful or hateful or jealous or any of the negative emotions that we sometimes have as human beings, my suggestion is that you don't leave your body in that moment. And the reason why I say this is because there are elements that you can attract if you have those feelings or those thoughts. Please always remember that in the spirit plane, in the astral plane, what you think and how you feel can manifest itself instantly. So if you're not in a good place, the astral plane is not a good place for you to be. The night I decided to visit my cousin, I was feeling desperate to see him, desperate to connect with him, desperate to see how he was doing. And that was absolutely the wrong emotion to have. I was so excited when I got out because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to see him. Plus, it had been a while since I'd been out anyway. So the moment I got out of my body, I reached out my hand and I said, cousin, take my hand. It was a huge mistake. You never, ever, ever simply reach your hand out into the astral plane and ask your cousin, your mother, your father, your friend, whomever it is that's passed away to simply take your hand out of desperation. Because what can happen is there could be a being that feeds off that sort of thing that happens to be there and takes your hand. This is, of course, what happened to me. A being took my hand. Thankfully, I knew as soon as the being took it that this was not my cousin. Instantly, I knew it was not him. And I was able to free myself of the being's grip fairly quickly, and I was able to get back into my body. Now, the moment I got back into my body, I was furious with myself. I could not believe that I had made that kind of mistake. But mistakes happen. It went much, much smoother. The moment I left my body, I focused on my cousin, and I felt that familiar rushing sensation. There was darkness in the beginning, and that darkness slowly gave way to an apartment of some sort. It was gradual, and that's how it works sometimes when I travel with the power of thought. Sometimes I can see the objective in the distance and I'm pulled toward it, and sometimes it's darkness, and then slowly that area, wherever I am, begins to materialize. I began to look around. There was nothing really about this place that stood out for me, per se. There were furnishings, and it was a couch, as I remember. There may have even actually been some kind of ball that I saw laying on the ground. It looked like a typical apartment to me. And for whatever reason, I had the sense, like I did when I contacted my grandmother, that I was somehow in Chicago. It was just a sense. I moved through the apartment, and I passed one, maybe two rooms that were empty. The third room was somehow darker than the others. I couldn't see inside of it. Almost pitch black, as if somehow the darkness was obscuring whatever was inside. I believe I did try to focus to see what was in that room, but I couldn't see anything. I could not see anything. And not long after that, I ended up back in my body. So, connecting with loved ones on the other side. I may never know why it was that I was unable to connect with my father or my cousin. Perhaps it was because they had other business that they had to deal with. I don't know. But honestly, I don't blame them. I mean, put yourself in the position of someone who has passed. They have lived their existence in this world in a kind of amnesia. And when they finally pass and disconnect from this world, that amnesia is lifted, and suddenly they remember everything, that they are infinite, and that they exist in an infinite number of realities, as I believe that we all do. That doesn't mean that they are not still your mother, your father, your cousin, your husband, your wife. It simply means that they're more. Thank you so much for coming on another journey with me. And until next time, take care.